My dear students and learners, today I shall discuss a new topic of the course Legal Environment of Business, and that is the Sale of Goods Act 1930. In this lecture, I shall discuss the subtopics such as definition of contract of sale, essentials of a contract of sale, then distinction between sale and agreement to sell, sale and hire purchase, sale and contract for work and labor, goods and kinds of goods, effect of perishing of goods, and modes of fixing the price. The law as to sale of goods was originally embodied in section 76 to 123 of the Indian Contract Act 1872. It is well known that our Sales of Goods Act 1930 is based upon and is largely a reproduction of the English Sale of Goods Act 1893 and in principle the law of sale. Dear students, now we shall discuss what is sale of goods. Now, sale of goods is a contract, and you know a contract is an agreement enforceable by law between two parties, which is enforceable by law is a contract. Similarly, sale of goods also is an agreement between seller and buyer to transfer the property in goods or agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for price. The sale of goods contract may be between one part owner and another, and it also may be absolute or conditional. There are some essentials or essential elements of a sale of contract. Now we shall discuss what are the essential elements of a sale of contract, and we shall also give examples to understand the essential elements of a sale of contract. Essentials of a contract of sale are two parties, transfer of property, goods, price, includes both a sale and an agreement to sell, and no formalities are required. The first essential element of a contract of sale is two parties. In a contract of sale, there are two parties like seller and buyer. These two parties make agreement between them to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for price. For example, Mr. A and B own a typewriter machine. Now, if Mr. A sells his part or ownership to Mr. B, then Mr. B will become the full owner of the typewriter machine. A person may buy his own goods. For example, where a person's goods are sold in execution of a decree of a court, he may himself buy them so as to save them from a transfer of ownership to someone else. The second essential element of contract of sale is transfer of property. Here, the seller must either transfer the property in goods or agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for price. However, a mere transfer of possession cannot be termed as a sale. For example, Mr. X is a seller of a typewriter machine. Now, if Mr. X says that I may sell my typewriter machine if anybody gives me 1 lakh, this is called a mere expression of agreement. a mere agreement of or intention of the seller. So this intention will not produce or will not make a sale agreement. Third point is goods. For each and every contract of sale, it is made based on something, and that is called goods. Every kind of movable property except actionable claim and money is regarded as goods. Goodwill, trademarks, copyrights, patent right, water, gas, electricity, decree of a court of law are all regarded as goods in this law. Now we shall see what is actionable claims. Actionable claims means claims which can be enforced by a legal action or a suit. For example, a bill of exchange or a promissory note represents a debt, that is an actionable claim which cannot be sold, and so these are not goods. It implies the right of the creditor to recover its amount from the debtor. Money. Money means current money. It is not regarded goods because it is the medium of exchange through which goods can be bought. Old and rare coins, however, may be treated as goods and sold as such. The next point is the price. Price here means when one thing is exchanged with another is called the price of other goods. If goods are sold or exchanged for other goods, the transaction is called barter system. If goods are sold partly for goods and partly for money, the contract is one of sale. Contract of sale also includes both, that means sale and agreement to sell. Both are termed as contract of sale according to this Sale of Contract 1930. What is sale? Sale means when contract of sale is made and the property or goods, property in goods are immediately transferred from seller to buyer, then it is called sale. And in an agreement to sell, the property is not transferred or the goods are not transferred from seller to buyer immediately. Only agreement is finalized, agreement for transferring the title or the property in goods. It is finalized before transferring the goods from seller to buyer. For example, on January 1, A agrees with B that he will sell B his scooter on 15 January for a sum of taka 30,000. It is an agreement to sell since A agrees the ownership of the scooter to B at a future time. He will transfer of this scooter. For making sale of a contract of sale, there is no formalities to be is required. For example, in making the contract of sale, neither payment is required nor goods are required to transfer from seller to buyer. And also contract can be implied too. Dear students, now we shall distinguish between sale and agreement to sell. We shall differentiate these two terminologies as per this law by using some points. The points are transfer of property, that means transfer of ownership, risk of loss, consequences of breach of sale of agreement contract, right of resale, insolvency of the buyer before he pays for the goods, and insolvency of seller if the buyer has already paid the price. The first difference between transfer of property or ownership between sale and agreement to sell is, in case of sale, property is property in goods is transferred from seller to buyer immediately. But in case of agreement to sell, property is in goods is not transferred immediately from seller to buyer. Risk of loss. In case of in case of sale, as property in goods is transferred from seller to buyer, so if the product or goods are destroyed, then the loss is to be borne by the buyer. But in case of agreement to sell, it will be borne by the seller. Next point is breach of consequences of breach of contract of sale. In case of sale, if seller refuses to pay or does not pay the price to the seller, then the seller can take action against buyer for the price. But in case of agreement to sell, if buyer refuses to pay the price to the seller, then seller only can sue for damage, not for price. Right of resale. In case of sale, goods are in possession of buyer. So here seller cannot resell the goods. But in case of agreement to sell, goods are in the possession of seller. Therefore, seller can transfer the property in goods to another buyer. In this case, only the old buyer can go for action, legal action, for damage against the seller. Insolvency of the buyer before he pays for the goods. In case of sale, the seller, in the absence of a right of lien over the goods, must deliver the goods to the assignee or official receiver. He is entitled only to a rateable dividend for the goods price. But in an agreement to sell, the seller may refuse to deliver the goods to the assignee or official receiver unless paid for, as ownership has not passed to the buyer. Insolvency of seller if the buyer has already paid the price. In case of sale, if the seller is adjust insolvent, the buyer is entitled to recover the goods from the assignee or official receiver. And in case of agreement to sell, the buyer can only claim a rateable dividend and not the goods. Dear students, now we shall discuss what is hire purchase. Hire purchase means the agreement between seller and buyer. It is an agreement to sell the product or goods, and goods are transferred to the ownership of the buyer for its use. And after the completion of certain installments, fixed installments, the ownership or the property in goods is fully transferred from seller to buyer in this case. There is a difference between sale and hire purchase. As you know, sale is an agreement between seller and buyer, and transfer of property in goods are immediately transferred from seller to buyer. But in case of hire purchase, the transfer of property or ownership in goods is not transferred immediately. After the completion of certain fixed installments, only then the full property in goods is transferred from seller to buyer. Now we shall see the specific difference between sale and hire purchase. The differences are in transfer of property or ownership, possession of the buyer, termination of contract, risk of loss, passing the title, and sales tax. First point is difference is transfer of property or ownership. In a sale, property ownership in the goods is transferred to the buyer immediately at the time of contract. But in hire purchase, the property ownership in the goods passes to the hirer upon payment of the last installment. Position of buyer. In case of sale, the position of the buyer is that of the owner of the goods. But in hire purchase, the position of the hirer is that of a bailee till he pays the last installment to seller. Termination of the contract. In case of sale, the buyer cannot terminate the contract and is bound to pay the price of the goods to the seller. But in hire purchase, the hirer may, as he so likes, terminate the contract by returning the goods to its owner without any liability to pay remaining installments. Risk of losses. In case of sale, the seller takes the risk of any loss resulting from the insolvency of the buyer. But in case of hire purchase, the owner takes no such risk. If the hirer fails to pay an installment to the owner, has the right to take back the goods. Passing title. In case of sale, the buyer can pass a good title to a bona fide purchaser from him. But in case of hire purchase, the hirer cannot pass any title even to a bona fide purchaser. Sales taxes. In case of sale, sales tax is levied at the time of the contract. But in case of hire purchase, sales tax is not leviable until it eventually ripens into a sale. Dear students, now we shall see the difference between hire purchase and agreement to sell. In a hire purchase, the owner is bound to sell the goods later if the hirer pays all the installments as agreed, but the hirer cannot be compelled to buy as he has an option to buy or to return the goods. But in case of agreement to buy, imports a legal obligation to buy and there is no option available to the buyer to buy or to terminate the contract. Now we shall see the difference between sale and contract for work and labor. Sales tax is levied only in case of a contract of sale, where the essence of the contract is rendering of service, an exercise of skill, and no goods are delivered as such. It is a contract of labor and work and labor and not of sale. For example, a dentist agreed to make a set of false teeth for a lady and fit it into her mouth. It is a contract for the sale of goods. An order for making and fixing curtains in a house is a contract of sale of goods, though it involves some work and labor in fixing the same. Students, in sale, contract of sale, goods, property in goods are transferred from seller to buyer. Now we shall see different kinds of goods: existing goods, future goods, and contingent goods. We shall see the details of these three types of goods. Existing goods are two types: specific and uncertain goods. Specific goods, for example, A agrees to sell to B a particular radio bearing a distinctive number. There is a contract of sale of specific goods. This is an example of specific or ascertained goods. And unascertained goods, that is also existing goods. A agrees to sell to B one bag of sugar out of the lot of 100 bags lying in his godown. It is a sale of unascertained goods. Future goods. These goods may be either not yet in existence or be in existence but not acquired by the seller. Even if the parties purport to effect a present sale of future goods, in law it operates only as an agreement to sell. Here is an example of future goods. X agrees to sell to Y all the mangoes which will be produced in his garden in next year. It is a contract of sale of future goods amounting to an agreement to sell. Contingent goods. Goods, the acquisition of which by the seller depends upon an uncertain contingency are called contingency goods. A contract of sale of contingent goods is enforceable only if the event on the happening of which the performance of the contract is dependent happens, otherwise the contract becomes void. Now we shall see an example of contingent goods. X agrees to sell to Y 25 bales of Egyptian cotton, provided the ship which is bringing them reaches the port safely. If the ship is sunk, the contract becomes void and the seller is not liable. Now we shall see the effect of perishing the goods. Perishing means not only physical destruction of the goods, but it also covers damage to goods so that the goods have ceased to exist in the commercial sense, that is, the merchantable character has been lost, and loss of goods by theft, and where the goods have been lawfully requisitioned by the government. Price of sale. Price is considered as the exchange of the goods. It is one of the important elements of contract of sale. Now we shall see the modes of fixing the price of goods. It may be expressly fixed by the contract itself, and or it may be fixed in accordance with an agreed manner provided by the contract. For example, it may be agreed that the buyer would pay the market price prevailing on a particular date, or that the price is to be fixed by a third party appointed by the consent of the parties. However, in the following cases, the agreement of the parties as to price is uncertain, and hence the agreement is void ab initio. That means void from the beginning. Such as, if the price is agreed to be whatever sum the seller be offered by any third party, or if the price is left to be fixed by one of the contracting parties expressly, and if no price is fixed, then the contract is not void for uncertainty. It also may be determined by the course of dealings between the parties, and if the price is not capable of being determined in accordance with any of the above modes, the buyer is bound to pay the seller a reasonable price. Agreement to sell at valuation, where there is an agreement to sell goods on the terms that the price is to be fixed by the valuation of the third party, and such third party fails to fix the price, then the contract becomes void. Students, we have arrived at the last stage of this lecture. In this lecture, we learned what is sale, contract of sale according to Sale of Contract 1930. We learned the essentials or essential elements of a contract of sale. We distinguished between sale and agreement to sell. We distinguished between hire purchase and agreement to sell, and also hire purchase and sell. We also discussed different types of goods. We discussed the effect of perishing the goods, and also different modes of fixing the price of the goods. Dear students, I hope that this lecture will be helpful for you to understand the Sale of Goods Act 1930.